For 22 years, Owen Parrish has visited Meadowlark Park on the anniversary of his older brother's disappearance. He remembers that day in 1976, the red and white checkered blanket, the sound of his brother Jasper's laugh, the wave goodbye. Then, Jasper and his girlfriend Cora vanished from their picnic, leaving behind nothing but a half-eaten lunch. Now, as the town prepares to bury a new time capsule, a backhoe strikes something unexpected. A rusted, unmarked metal drum buried just yards from where Jasper and Cora were last seen. It's a story that reminds us that the past is never truly buried, and sometimes it finds its own way back to the surface. What do you think they found inside? Stick around as we uncover a secret that a small town tried to forget. The jarring clang of steel on steel echoed across the open field, silencing the gentle hum of the September afternoon. Owen felt the sound in his bones. He had been standing under the familiar shade of the old oak tree, the same one he'd leaned against as a 13-year-old while watching his brother Jasper and Cora spread out their picnic blanket. Now, at 35, the memories were less sharp, softened by time, but the ache was a permanent resident in his chest. Every year on this day, he came here to remember. But this year was different. The park was sectioned off with bright orange fencing, the site of the town's upcoming bicentennial celebration. The plan was to bury a new time capsule, a testament to 1998, for future generations to find. The backhoe operator killed the engine and climbed down from his cab, peering into the freshly dug hole. A small crowd of town officials, including Mayor Thompson, gathered at the edge. Owen's feet moved before his mind gave the command, walking briskly toward the commotion. He was just a history teacher at the local high school, but in that moment, he felt an ownership of this piece of land that no one else could claim. "What is it? What did you hit?" the mayor asked, his voice tight with annoyance at the delay. The operator pointed a dirt-caked glove. "Something metal. Big. Looks like an old oil drum, maybe." Sheriff Brody arrived, his cruiser kicking up dust on the service road. He was a decent man who had been a young deputy back in '76. He'd inherited the Parrish Donovan cold case, and Owen saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes as he approached. "Owen," the sheriff said with a solemn nod, "you shouldn't be here. This is a town construction site." "My brother disappeared from right there, Brody," Owen said, his voice steady as he pointed toward the oak tree. "You hit something buried exactly where he was last seen, on the exact anniversary. I'm not going anywhere." The sheriff looked from Owen's determined face to the rusted cylinder in the ground. It was about 4 feet long, clearly sealed at both ends with a thick, welded seam. There were no markings, just a uniform coat of deep orange rust. It didn't look like any town property Owen had ever seen. Mayor Thompson was already talking about getting the project back on schedule, dismissing the object as old farm junk. "It's probably just a piece of a culvert or an old water tank," he said dismissively. "Let's just pull it out and get on with it." "No," Sheriff Brody said, his voice firm. "We don't know what it is. We're not just going to yank it out of the ground." He turned to Owen. "This is probably nothing, but given the circumstances, I want to do this by the book." The decision was made to treat the object with caution. The public works crew was called in, not with a backhoe, but with shovels and straps. They worked for the next hour, carefully excavating the soil around the drum. Owen watched every shovelful of dirt, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. Hope was a dangerous thing, an emotion he had learned to suppress over 2 decades, but it was flaring up now, hot and uncontrollable. As the crew finally managed to get straps around the cylinder and lift it from the earth, Owen could see just how intentionally it had been buried. The hole was neat, just big enough for the object. This wasn't junk. This was something someone had wanted to hide. They loaded it onto a flatbed truck. "We're taking it to the maintenance depot at the town hall," Sheriff Brody explained to Owen. "We'll cut it open there. You have a right to be present." Owen simply nodded, unable to speak. He followed the truck in his own car, the short drive across town feeling like the longest journey of his life. 22 years of silence, of unanswered questions and hollow anniversaries had all led to a rusty metal drum pulled from the earth. The town maintenance bay was a cavernous space that smelled of grease and cold concrete. The drum sat in the center of the floor under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights. A small group had assembled: Owen, Sheriff Brody, Mayor Thompson, who now looked more intrigued than annoyed, and a couple of deputies. A local reporter tipped off about the unusual find, stood by the door, held back by a stern-faced officer. A town worker named Gus, a man with forearms as thick as tree branches, stood ready with an industrial cutting torch. "Just a straight line across the seam, Gus," the sheriff instructed. "Slow and easy." Owen held his breath as Gus lowered his mask and ignited the torch. A brilliant blue-white flame hissed to life, and a shower of orange sparks erupted as the fire bit into the rusted metal. The sound was deafening, a high-pitched scream of tortured steel. Gus moved with methodical slowness, tracing the circular seam. Owen's mind raced with possibilities. What could be inside? Evidence? Remains? Or most likely just old rotting newspapers from a forgotten town project, a discovery that would send him home with a fresh wave of disappointment. After what felt like an eternity, Gus finished the cut and switched off the torch. The sudden silence was heavy. A wisp of smoke curled up from the hot metal. Two deputies wearing thick leather gloves stepped forward and carefully lifted the circular end piece off the cylinder. Everyone leaned in. There was a faint, musty smell, like damp earth and old paper. The interior wasn't empty. It was packed full of items, each carefully wrapped in thick, dark oilcloth to protect them from moisture. It wasn't a town time capsule. The contents were too personal, too carefully preserved. One of the deputies reached in and pulled out the first package. He unwrapped it to reveal a worn, leather-bound journal. Attached to the cover with a piece of twine was a folded, yellowed piece of paper. Sheriff Brody took the note and carefully unfolded it. He cleared his throat and read the words aloud, his voice echoing slightly in the big room. "To whoever finds this," he began. "My name is Jasper Parrish. Today's date is September 19th, 1976. If you are reading this, it means my girlfriend, Cora Donovan, and I are missing, or worse. We could not go to the authorities in our town for reasons that will become clear. Please do not give this to the local police. Deliver the contents of this capsule to a journalist named David Wren at the Boston Globe. He's a good man who can't be bought. He will know what to do." A stunned silence fell over the room. Owen felt the floor shift beneath him. This wasn't a time capsule. It was a message in a bottle, a final desperate act from his brother. "David Wren," the reporter by the door mumbled. "He was a big-shot investigative reporter back in the 70s, retired about 10 years ago." Sheriff Brody looked at Owen, his expression grim. He knew, just as Owen did, that this changed everything. The official theory for 2 decades had been that Jasper and Cora had run away, or had a tragic accident while hiking in the woods beyond the park. But this note spoke of fear, of a deliberate act, and of a conspiracy of silence in their own town. Before anyone could speak, a deputy pulled another item from the drum. It was a small handheld microcassette recorder, the kind popular in the 70s. A single tiny tape was still inside. Sheriff Brody held up a hand. "Okay, this is now an official crime scene," he declared. He turned to the reporter. "Not a word of this gets out yet. You understand?" He then looked at Owen, his eyes filled with a new, somber respect. "Your brother was trying to tell us something, Owen. After 22 years, I think we're finally about to find out what it was." The sheriff knew the journalist Jasper mentioned was long retired and likely unreachable. The responsibility now fell on his shoulders. He made a decision. "We need a cassette player," he said to one of his deputies. "Find one. We're listening to this right now." A deputy was dispatched and returned 20 minutes later with a dusty shoebox-sized player from the station's old evidence storage. The small group reconvened in the sheriff's office, the air thick with tension. Brody carefully placed the tiny tape into the machine and pressed play. After a moment of static, a voice filled the room, a voice Owen hadn't heard in 22 years. It was Jasper, his voice a hushed, urgent whisper, the sound strained with fear. "Testing. I hope this is working," the voice on the tape said. "Cora and I are hiding in the woods just east of the picnic grounds. Something happened. Something awful." Owen sank into a chair, his hands trembling as he listened to his brother's last recorded words. Jasper's voice, layered with the hiss of old tape, described how their peaceful picnic had been interrupted. They had decided to take a short walk along the creek that ran through the woods bordering the park. From a thicket of trees, they saw a car pull up on a secluded service road. 2 men got out. One was a stranger, but the other they recognized immediately. It was Magistrate Alden, one of the town's most respected and powerful figures, a man on the fast track to becoming a county judge. The 2 men were arguing. It was about money, Jasper whispered on the tape. The stranger was angry, accusing Alden of cheating him. The argument escalated until Alden, in a sudden explosion of rage, struck the man with a tire iron he pulled from his trunk. The man went down and didn't get up. Jasper's breath hitched on the recording. He killed him, Cora. He killed him right there. Then he put the body in his trunk and drove away. The tape ended. The only sound in the office was the soft whir of the empty cassette player. Owen stared at the machine, his mind reeling. Magistrate Alden. A man who had attended fundraisers for their search party. A man who had offered his parents his deepest condolences. Sheriff Brody broke the silence. "Open the journal," he said, his voice low and grave. He slid the leather-bound book across the desk to Owen. With numb fingers, Owen opened it. It was Jasper's, filled with his familiar, slightly messy handwriting. The last several pages were written in a frantic, rushed script. He detailed their terror after witnessing the murder. They had run back to their car, terrified that Alden had seen them. They knew they couldn't go to the local police. Alden was too powerful, too connected. He practically ran the town. Their plan, as idealistic and desperate as it was laid out in the journal. Jasper, a part-time welder at a local garage, had built the capsule from a scrap metal drum. They would put the evidence inside, the tape and the journal, and bury it. It was their insurance policy. Their plan was to confront Alden, not for money, but to try and force him to turn himself in. They thought the knowledge that this evidence existed would be enough leverage. The final entry was dated that evening. It was short and chilling. "Meeting him tonight at the old quarry," Jasper wrote. "He thinks we want to be paid off. We just want him to do the right thing. I don't know if this is brave or stupid. Cora is scared. So am I. If we're not back by morning, we made the wrong choice." They had made the wrong choice. Owen closed the journal, the weight of the truth pressing down on him. His brother hadn't run away. He and Cora had been silenced by a man everyone in town looked up to. A man who was now retired Judge Alden, living in a sprawling estate on the other side of the county, revered as a pillar of the community. Sheriff Brody stood up and put on his hat. His face was set like stone. "Alden was promoted to county judge a year after they disappeared," he said, his voice filled with disgust. "He built his whole career on a foundation of murder." He looked at Owen. "I know this is hard, but your brother was a hero. He and that girl, they had more courage than anyone I've ever known." The sheriff turned to his deputy. "Get a warrant for Judge Alden's arrest. Charge is for the murders of Jasper Parrish and Cora Donovan. And find out who that other body was." The drive to Judge Alden's estate felt surreal. Owen rode with Sheriff Brody, the journal and the tape recorder in an evidence bag on the seat between them. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of the wealthy neighborhood where Alden lived. For 22 years, Owen had imagined 100 different scenarios for what had happened to his brother, but none were as dark and sinister as this. The killer wasn't some nameless drifter. He was a man they all knew, a man they all respected. They pulled up the long, winding driveway to a large brick mansion. Judge Alden himself answered the door. He was in his late 60s now, but still tall and imposing, with a full head of white hair and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He looked from the sheriff to Owen, and a flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. "Sheriff Brody," he said, his voice smooth and authoritative, "and Mr. Parrish, to what do I owe this unexpected visit?" "We have a warrant for your arrest, Judge," Brody said, his voice unwavering, "for the murders of Jasper Parrish and Cora Donovan in 1976. Alden laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "That's absurd. That case has been cold for 20 years. What nonsense have you dug up now?" "We found your time capsule, Judge," Owen said, speaking for the first time. The word made Alden flinch. "The one my brother buried for you." Brody didn't wait for a response. He pulled out the microcassette player. In the quiet of the grand foyer, he pressed play. Jasper's terrified, whispering voice filled the space, recounting the murder he had witnessed at the park. As the tape played, Alden's face slowly transformed. The mask of civility crumbled, replaced by a look of pure, cold rage. The color drained from his face. When the tape ended, he simply stared at them, his jaw clenched. "Naive fools," he spat, the venom in his voice shocking. "They were just kids. They should have taken the money I offered them. I would have given them anything to keep their mouths shut." It was a confession. The deputies moved in, placing the once untouchable judge in handcuffs. As they led him away, Alden looked at Owen, his eyes devoid of any remorse. "They confronted me at the quarry," he said, his voice chillingly calm. "Threatened me. I did what I had to do to protect my life, my future. I buried them out there. Their bodies will never be found." The doors of the police cruiser slammed shut and the car pulled away, its taillights disappearing down the long driveway. Owen stood there watching it go, feeling not the triumph of justice, but the immense, crushing weight of a tragedy that had finally found its end. The news of Judge Alden's arrest sent a shockwave through the town and the state. The man who had sent hundreds of people to prison was a killer himself. The body of the man he'd murdered at the park was identified as a low-level associate who had tried to blackmail him. Alden's confession led investigators to the now-defunct quarry, which had been filled in and redeveloped years ago. The bodies of Jasper and Cora were never recovered, but it no longer mattered in the same way. The not knowing was over. A few weeks later, Owen stood before a crowd of townspeople in Meadowlark Park, not far from the old oak tree. He had organized a memorial service for Jasper and Cora. He spoke of his brother's courage, his idealism, and his ultimate sacrifice for doing the right thing. He no longer felt the hollow ache when he visited this place. The grief was still there, a quiet companion that would walk with him for the rest of his life. But it was now joined by a profound sense of pride. His brother hadn't just disappeared. He had stood up to evil, and his voice, buried under the earth for 22 years, had finally been heard. Jasper and Cora made a choice to confront a killer themselves instead of trying to find a way to get their evidence to the authorities anonymously. Do you think their brave and idealistic plan was their biggest mistake? Or was it the only real choice they had against a powerful man who controlled their town? We love bringing these stories of long-lost mysteries to light. If this one moved you, consider subscribing and joining our community of truth seekers. We appreciate every one of you who listens.